Hey everyone, thanks for tuning in to another episode of Esoteric Literacy. I'm sorry I haven't posted a video in so long, but we know that these last 2 years have been a little ridiculous for most people. But here's a new episode, and I'm very appreciative that almost none of you unsubscribed over this long period of silence from me, and I thank you for that. Today's video, I'm making it more out of a sense of like urgency than it's not really a topic that I like to address, but I feel like I have to. And it might be controversial, or even some of my viewers might be disappointed because it's only tangentially related to spirituality and esotericism. It is tied in, and I'll tie it in, but it is going to be like a political episode, sort of geopolitical and cultural, and that might be distasteful to a lot of you, and it's distasteful to me. It's kind of one of my cardinal rules is to like not talk about politics, but considering recent events, and personal experiences that I've been having with Americans, is I think I need to describe certain views that Westerners just seem to be largely ignorant of, and this ignorance that a lot of Westerners, and especially liberal Westerners, are guilty of is dangerous. It's this ignorance has led to warmongering and just rabid hatred of other cultures and people, and it's disturbing to see, especially from liberals, because they're supposed to be the ones who are like pro-peace, anti-war, pro-understanding. But it seems that something like a switch has flipped in the mind of these people, and they are like just amping up just hatred and division, and they're just beating the drums of war. And I wanted to just make a video that would be, in the vein of inculcating peace and harmony and understanding between cultures. I'm sick of this hatred and divisive propaganda we're seeing all over the place, and the things that my fellow countrymen are saying about Russia and about other nations like them are it's just disturbing. It's like it's really freaking me out. It's like this is the wrong direction we should be going. The things that the news is saying, the things that people are saying, the things that people believe about Russia are just, it's nonsense, and it's horrifying. So I want to make a video that will help Westerners understand the Eurasian point of view, the Eurasian worldview, and how it is valid, how it is natural and normal, and how it should be allowed to exist in this world. So this video is about Eurasianism, the ideology or the sort of cultural identity of Eurasia, and how Eurasia is its own civilization with its own unique history and its own unique historical mission and its own right to have a future. And how these different cultures that we have the liberal West, we have and the Eurasianist East, and we have the South. We have sort of, the global South. We have these different civilizations: Latin American civilization, African civilization, Asian civilization, Eurasian civilization, and Western civilization. And how they all have, and Arab civilization, of course, and how they all have their own ideologies, their own systems of economy, their own beliefs and religious culture, and how all these differences should be allowed to thrive in this world, and instead of being wiped out and subsumed by Westernism or liberalism or globalization, whatever you want to call it. These words are basically synonymous. And the Eurasianists are really the only real challenger to global liberalism that exists. And I'll get into all of this in this video. So if you don't want to listen to this type of video, this type of information, I understand. It's uncomfortable, it's controversial. The things I say are going to probably annoy a lot of Westerners who watch this YouTube channel, or this not just YouTube, but this internet channel that I've got going on. And I don't want to piss anybody off. I don't want to bother you or ruin your day. So if you don't want to listen to like a geopolitical, cultural thing and tying it into current events, and you'd just rather not watch this video, I get it. I'm not going to hold it against you. But if you want to, in my opinion, help be a peacemaker, help breed a culture of understanding and tolerance and awareness of each other, and acceptance of other civilizations, then I think these ideas might be very interesting to you. Because a lot of Westerners, and especially liberal Westerners, don't even know what Eurasianism is. They've never heard of it, even though it's roughly a 200-year-old, 230-year-old like ideology, like cultural self-awareness. So first, I guess the first point will be describing what Eurasianism is and sort of its origins. It kind of came from, in the late 18th century and throughout the 19th century, there was this term Slavophilism. And this was essentially a derogatory term created by English speakers, Englishmen, referring to Slavic people who appreciated their own culture and history, who saw the potential greatness of a Slavic civilization. They were known as Slavophiles. And they were seen as, largely by the Western world, mostly by English people, they were seen as like idiots. Because to Western Europeans, Slavs are considered like barbarians. They're considered like savages and degenerates and like evil, drunken monkey people. And to see greatness in them was ridiculous. And especially for Slavs to see greatness in themselves was seen as delusional. So they were called Slavophiles, these people who saw hope for a Slavic civilization of the future, and who pointed out all the great things about how Slavs see the world, their sort of unique spirituality, their unique connection to the soil, to the land that other cultures, especially in Europe, lacked. And, eventually they just adopted the term Slavophile for themselves because they thought it was funny and they thought it was, they made it appropriate for themselves. And eventually this ideology grew into what's called Eurasianism. I think that term was coined in the 1890s, became popular up until the Bolshevik Revolution. The Bolsheviks squashed it because, of course, the communists and Soviets were globalists, and they were against like anything that even smelled of nationalism. And Eurasianism is somewhat nationalistic in some ways. So Eurasianism was totally suppressed during the Soviet Union. They didn't want Slavs to have like their own cultural identity. They wanted, workers of the world unite, global economics, global communism, all that sort of thing. And then in the 90s, you have a resurgence of Eurasianism. After the Soviet Union collapsed, you have people like Alexander Dugin coming back with the idea, trying to revitalize the idea. Now, they refer to it as Neo-Eurasianism because it's less nationalistic and less identitarian. It's less about being Slavic, and it's more about, creating a new type of order that is, instead of a unipolar world order, a multipolar world order. And so, Western civilization believes in a unipolar world order, which means they want to dominate everything, just have one culture, one ideology that's for the whole planet, as opposed to a multipolar world order, which would be many different civilizations, many different ideologies, many different economic systems, many different religious traditions, many different scientific methodologies, and just having different cultures and different civilizations with their own geographical space and cultural customs and living in harmony with each other, and just allowing the fact that there is no unipolar world order, there's no one ideology, there's no one economic system, there are many, and that the world can exist like that. So basically, you have the Western civilization, which desires a unipolar world order. They want everything to be liberal. They want everything to be the West. People call this the New World Order. Like, you'll hear conspiracy theorists call it the New World Order, which is true because you have people like Zbigniew Brzezinski, Henry Kissinger, Donald Rumsfeld, the Bush family. You know, they use that word, the New World Order, on their own, like in public speeches and stuff. So of course conspiracy theorists adopt it. But what it is really is the liberal world order, or the Western world order, or what people have been in recent years referring to as globalism. The idea that everything should be capitalist, everything should be liberal, everybody should subscribe to like materialistic, atheistic sciences, everybody should hold liberal values, and anyone who doesn't is like backwards and degenerate. And then you have the Eurasianists who believe in supporting a multipolar world order. So they will allow for Eurasian civilization, Arab civilization. They'll still allow for liberal and Western civilization, but it should just be contained to the Western world. Latin American civilization, African civilization, Asian civilization, and so on. And that these civilizations should have their own economic systems, their own currency systems, their own religious and moral values, their own spiritual traditions, and that they should be allowed to thrive on their own that way. Without interference from competing ideologies, and unless they want to have interference from competing ideologies to keep things fresh. So you have these two clashing ideologies right now: the unipolar world order of the West versus the multipolar world order of the Eurasianists. And in his, I think it was 1966 book published by Zbigniew Brzezinski, I think the book was just called Geopolitics, and it's the book that kind of coined the term. Brzezinski said, he was like, he's one of the kings of the liberals. He wanted to push the whole liberal world order on everyone, pushed globalism, came up with a playbook for liberal geopolitics and how NATO should spread all over the world and things like that. And he said that, in this book, he said that a challenger from Eurasia must never be allowed to arise, because they would be the only real threat to the liberal New World Order. And that kind of tells you everything you need to know, like, because Brzezinski, Henry Kissinger, Donald Rumsfeld, like these types of people, Francis Fukuyama, who wrote his book, The End of History, these are people who like codified what the liberal world order is and how it should be adopted by everyone, how if the whole world believed in liberalism, capitalism, and democracy, then we would like create utopia. I mean, even Francis Fukuyama said that history would end if everyone believed in liberalism and democracy. He believed there'd be no more war, no more problems, that everything would just be peaches and rainbows. And like, that kind of shows you just how delusional these architects of liberalism are. They believe in that sort of, that sort of weird messianic, if everyone just believed what I believed, we would live in a utopia. And Eurasia is a challenger to that. So basically, there were the three political ideologies of the 20th century. You have fascism, communism, and liberalism. And we know that fascism and communism just outright failed catastrophically, and just they went the way of the dodo. They existed as experiments and just disappeared. And the third experimental ideology and political system and economic system, liberalism, no longer had any challengers, especially after the 1980s, 1990s. It just became the de facto world order. Nobody thought to challenge it. It was just taken for granted. And now you can see that. This is what I find disturbing about, what a lot of Americans and Western Europeans think these days, and liberals in general, is that like they take liberalism for granted. They think it is absolutely correct. They think it is the best ideology. They think nothing can challenge it. They think nothing is better than it. They think all of human history has just been leading toward them, the liberals. They're the best. They're the smartest. They're the most enlightened. They're the most compassionate. They're the most just. They believe everything about their ideology is just so correct and so perfect that nothing is ever better than it. And people say that sort of stuff about democracy and liberalism all the time. All the academic theorists who talk about it, they say like democracy is the best system we've ever invented. Oh, it's so great. Liberalism is the best. Oh, we're so tolerant of everybody. We're just the best. We just want freedom for everyone. And this is just not true, because liberalism has become its own totalitarianism. As it has gone unchallenged over the last 30 plus years, you could argue over the last 70 plus years with the end of World War II, because communism wasn't really a challenger of liberalism in the first place, but that's a whole other topic that's not necessary to cover. That liberalism is totalitarianism. It's just like fascism, just like communism. It's just a more subtle and secretive one, because fascism and communism are obviously totalitarian. They forced people through threat of violence, like obvious threat of violence and imprisonment, to believe what they wanted you to believe. Whereas in liberalism, it's like they pretend like you have choices of beliefs, and they pretend like they're not forcing you through violence and imprisonment to believe in liberalism. But the thing is, if you don't believe in liberalism, you become like a pariah. It's the government doesn't necessarily have to enforce its ideology the way they had to enforce fascism and communism. They get just regular people to believe in liberalism and to enforce it on their neighbors and family members and friends. Like, if you don't believe in liberalism, you're some sort of degenerate, some sort of bigot, some sort of racist, some sort of sexist, some sort of homophobe, some sort of tyrant, some sort of fascist. Anything that liberals don't like, they just call fascist, even if it's not fascist. They'll just throw that word around. They'll accuse you of all types of terrible things. They'll call you, the N-word, the other N-word, Nazi. If they don't like what you're saying, they'll just call you one of those and just try to get you to shut up. And that's kind of how it's enforced. It's enforced through embarrassment. It's enforced through social pressure. It's enforced through censorship today. We've seen over the last 6-7 years the rampant censorship of tech corporations and social media companies and the news media. Anyone who says anything to the right of socialist is like kicked off their platforms. Anyone who criticizes the government gets censored, things like that. We've all seen it. In fact, I've been shadow banned off of YouTube twice in the last 2 years, just for comments I've posted that were truthful quotes from other sources, and just for challenging the mainstream narrative. I've had my ability to comment revoked for months at a time, twice. And so the illusion of freedom and choice is here in liberalism. But the thing is look at all the illiberal countries out there. If you don't believe in democracy, the American military will just drop bombs on you. They'll blow up your wedding ceremonies if you don't believe in liberalism. They will bomb the liberalism into you. And if that's not totalitarianism and imperialism, I don't know what is. It has a lot to do with what archaeologists and historians refer to as like the two types of civilizations. You have sea-based civilizations and land-based civilizations. And sea-based civilizations are, they'll usually build their cities around the coasts, and their culture will be based on mercantilism and economics. So like money and wealth and travel will be their cultural strong points. And then land-based civilizations are more, they don't move around or travel as much because it's more difficult. You'd have to walk or take horses or drive or something, and that's not as easy as just using a ship in the ocean. So they have closer knit families, they care more about the land, they're more agrarian, build less large cities, and they have a connection to the land and to the soil, and because their families stick together and they have that connection to the land and they have that connection to their home and the geography that they live in, the terrain that's around them, they really get to know it, and there's a deeper, more naturalistic spirituality there, and their economy is kind of secondary to their culture. They're more driven by spiritual and traditional values, and the economy is subordinated to their spiritual values. Whereas a sea-based civilization, spiritual values are secondary or sometimes don't figure into the culture at all, and the economy is number one in a sea-based civilization. They care mostly about the accumulation of wealth and political power. This is the big difference between, these are like the two great types of civilizations. And you can see that coastal sea-based civilizations tend to collapse a lot faster and way more often than land-based civilizations. Land-based civilizations last much, much longer. And sea-based civilizations have actually never really won any wars against land-based civilizations. Land-based civilizations cannot be conquered by sea-based societies. It just doesn't happen because they have a higher morale. They're connected to their lands, they're connected to their home, they have more to fight for. Whereas a sea-based civilization are more mercenary. They don't really have anything to fight for except money and spreading political influence, and that doesn't really create high morale in your troops. It's just based on greed and power mongering. So that's the distinct difference of what's going on now between Atlantic civilization, or synonymous with Western civilization, is all sea-based and coastal, based on mercantilism. And Eurasia, which is a land-based civilization, having its heartland in Russia, which has always historically been a land-based society. And those are the two clashing civilizations and ideologies that we see today. And it's being acutely exposed in the current conflict in Ukraine. So you can characterize it, this conflict as the conflict between land-based and sea-based civilizations. My next point would be to talk about sort of the origin of liberalism and how it leads to ultimately to kind of anti-spiritual thinking. Not that everything about liberalism is bad. It's just there is along with liberalism comes this slippery slope toward anti-spirituality, and it's important to discuss that point, I think. So if you watch my last video called The Descent of the Ages, I get into this a little bit, and this will kind of piggyback on that idea. But it kind of begins with kind of the Protestant schism of the 16th century, when you have the ideology of humanism coming into play in Europe. You have people who are tired of the authority of the Catholic Church, and for good reason. I mean, if you know the history of the Inquisition, of course, there are a lot of people who would want to be out from under the heel of that type of tyrannical authority. But through the 1,000-year rise of the Catholic Church from the 5th century A.D. to the 16th century A.D., you see the Catholic Church just wiping out all the spiritual traditions throughout Europe and erasing them from history. And so by the 16th century A.D., Europeans really know nothing about spiritual tradition whatsoever. I mean, they will have forgotten their ancestral roots by that time. They'll have had next to no transcendental experiences except for a handful of saints like Teresa of Avila, Francis of Assisi, Benedict, people like that. But of course, those people were basically within the Christian tradition, usually within the Catholic tradition specifically. So even those were not allowing people to experience their traditional spiritual disciplines. By that time, Europeans would know nothing about meditation, yoga, asceticism, transcendent consciousness, anything like that. That would have all been wiped away by the Catholic Church. And so now they would have basically had two choices. If you feel like you want to be spiritual and religious, then you have to be a Catholic, because you're literally ignorant of any other option. You just don't know any better. But if you don't want that Catholic authority, then you basically have to be an atheist or a humanist, where you just believe that humans are the crown of creation, that humans are the best thing in the universe, and there's not necessarily any God, there's not necessarily any cosmic hierarchy of angels or anything like that. You're just going to believe in yourself or the human race in general as being the highest intelligent being in reality. So if you don't want other people telling you how to think, you don't want the dogmas of the church to tell you what reality is, you kind of want to come to your own conclusions about this stuff, your only option was pretty much humanism, because you would have been ignorant of your ancestors' spiritual traditions. You would have had no other recourse, no other method of gaining knowledge of reality other than just kind of using your intellect and becoming kind of like a humanist. And this would lead to like individualism. Individualism can lead to the atomization of society, the breaking up of the coherence of a nation, of a people, because now people are less organized ideologically and religiously and spiritually, and they're just kind of all thinking for themselves now, which of course will atomize everybody. And there's some benefit to that, and obviously a lot of problems to that. And this individualism will lead to capitalism, essentially, because if you want to liberate yourself from the authority of the Catholic Church, next you're going to want to liberate yourself from the authority of your local king, your national ruler. And you're going to say, well, I don't want to accumulate wealth for my king or kingdom anymore. I just want to accumulate wealth for myself. I don't see a point in accumulating wealth for the king. I don't believe the king owns everything. The idea of a king in classical traditional Europe is that the king is the steward of the land, and all the land and wealth belongs to God. And so it vicariously belongs to the king, and then everybody else in society is just kind of allowed to use it. The king sort of just allows everybody else to use his land and his money. But now with individualism and capitalism, you have people who are like, they don't believe in that anymore because they've, purged that kind of idea from their minds, so now they just want to accumulate wealth for themselves. This leads to the king losing ownership of wealth creation. So normally in a traditional society, the value of your currency is determined by how well your land is doing and how well your peasantry is doing. If the land is doing well, the peasants are doing well, that means your money is worth a lot. If the land is doing poorly, the peasants are doing poorly, and your money is worth not very much. But now, after the Age of Revolution, the American Revolution, the French Revolution, you had the merchant class rise over the aristocracy. I discussed this in my last video, Descent of the Ages, how the class system gets inverted, how the aristocracy rules over the military, over the economic class, and then over everybody else. After the Age of Revolution and the onset of liberalism, you have the merchant class, the economic class, rise above all the other classes, and now the creation of currency is in the hands of price speculators, bankers. The king is not creating currency anymore. The land, the wealth of the land itself is not creating currency anymore. Now bankers are creating currency, and they determine what it's worth based on stock markets, price speculation, futures speculation. They basically gamble on what they think prices of commodities will be in the near future. And this will determine how much your money is worth and how much your products and commodities are worth. And you can see that this opens the door for all types of corruption. This creates parasitism, where you now have an economic class that can generate wealth from nothing. They don't have to be productive, they don't have to be creative, they don't have to do anything useful for civilization, and yet they will accumulate vast sums of money for themselves because they'll just skim off the top of the transactions and the dividends that are created by speculating and gambling, essentially gambling on what they think the future prices will be. They collect the difference between what they thought the price will be and what the actual price is. That's just profit for them. They create enormous amounts of wealth for themselves, and now you have people who don't actually do anything for civilization having the most money. And now values are turned upside down. You no longer have the classical value system where your civilization is oriented towards spiritual principles. Now your civilization is oriented toward economic principles, and the economy is now seen as the greatest good in that culture. And meanwhile, while all this is happening in Western Europe and in America, this is not happening in Asia. Asian civilization is still living like it's, 1500 BC. Their traditional values are still there. Their sort of imperial mindset is still there. They're not experiencing this sort of liberal upheaval, this sort of change in culture and this overthrow of tradition. They're just not experiencing it. So that's something important to keep in mind, because Western Europe is, again, that Atlanticist, sea-based culture, and then Asia and Eastern Europe is more of the land-based and traditional culture. So they're like these two very different cultures existing during this development, while the West is like going into this new age, this sort of liberal age, this economic age. The East is just sort of staying the way it's always been. And that's just, for better or worse, I'm not putting a qualifier on it. I'm just saying keep that in mind. These are two different civilizations. And then, capitalism will lead directly to democracy. Because if you're now accumulating wealth for yourself as an individualist, you're going to want to accumulate political power for yourself as an individual. So you're going to get voting rights. You're going to want, everybody wants political access now. And then once everybody has political access, they believe all of their opinions are valid. And this, of course, leads to socialism, where people just want more and more and more for themselves. Once they have political access, they realize they can game that system to generate even more wealth for themselves. If they can't be stockbrokers and price speculators, they're going to try and accumulate wealth through other ways by just essentially forcing the government, or forcing the government to force other people to give them wealth. So you get socialism, and then socialism leads to radicalism, because now you have the real atomization of society, where individualism and socialism, capitalism, it's like all these individuals. It's just a sea, an ocean of individuals, all with their own beliefs, their own ideologies, their own views, their own desires, their own hopes for the future, their own goals. Nothing is coherent. So now you're just an atom in an ocean of atoms, and that leads to radicalism, like people just wanting to be liberated from everything. If the humanists wanted to be liberated from the church, and the liberals wanted to be liberated from the king, the capitalists want to be liberated from the king, and then the socialists want to be liberated from the capitalists, Democrat people want to be liberated from the government. I mean Democrat in terms of people who believe in democracy. I don't mean the modern Democrat political party. They obviously want a huge government. That's a different story. And then you get individuals who want to be liberated from everything. They want to be liberated from gender roles, which we saw, beginning back in as early as the 19-teens, but really in the 1960s. You have people wanting to be liberated from their traditional gender roles, for better or worse, not putting a qualifier on it. And now you have people that want to be liberated from their gender itself, and just coming up with all sorts of crazy individualistic ideas of how they identify. They want to be liberated from their identity, from their gender, from all that. And now we move into people wanting to be liberated from their humanity. You have transhumanists who they think being a human is too traditional, and they want to overthrow all traditions. So just the ontology of existing as a human being is something that they want to overthrow. And so you want people who want to genetically modify themselves to be something else, to implant, lop off their hands and put a robot hand on themselves, or, put microchips in their brains so they can think faster or think differently, or eat drugs that make you smarter, or just change your physical appearance. You have those people who make themselves look like various animals. You've seen all those cat people and stuff like that. So you can see how humanism and liberalism will lead down this slippery slope to transhumanism, this sort of anti-human feeling. And if you don't believe in the spirit, if you don't believe in spiritual liberation, then you're going to not really have a grasp on achieving happiness and contentment. So if you believe in spirituality, you can endure suffering in this world. You don't like the body you're born with. Maybe you have some disabilities. Maybe you don't like the fact that you were born the gender you were born. You feel different. You've all the problems that come along with existing in this flesh and blood body. You don't like these things. These things cause suffering and discomfort. Well, you can transcend that suffering through a good spiritual discipline, a good spiritual tradition. And through practicing one of those spiritual traditions, or the primordial spiritual tradition, you can alleviate whatever suffering you're feeling in this physical world, and you can have it rise above all these things internally. And it won't matter what your body is if you're, have issues, whatever issues you have with your body, they won't bother you, because you will have transcended them through an internal liberation. And I know a lot of people, this is very difficult for a lot of liberals and Westerners and people who believe in modern science. I'm probably speaking gibberish to them, and they have a hard time imagining what I'm talking about. So if you don't want to listen to that, that's fine. I'm wondering why you're watching this channel if you don't believe in that. But those of you who understand what I'm saying, you understand what I'm saying. So if you don't have that core spiritual tradition to liberate yourself from physical suffering, you don't believe in the spirit, you don't believe in anything like that, you're going to seek happiness outside of yourself. You're going to seek happiness by trying to change your body, by trying to change yourself in various ways. You don't like that you were born a man, so you're going to turn yourself into a woman. You don't like you were born a woman, you're going to turn yourself into a man. You don't like that you were born a human, so you're going to try to make yourself look like a feline or something. You don't like that you have 5 fingers, so you're going to get a robot hand that has 8 fingers. You don't like that your wrist has this much motion, range of motion. You want to get one that can spin all the way around 360 degrees. So you'll lop off your whole arm and put a robot arm on there. You don't like that you have to walk around on 2 legs, so you'll like get robot wings or something. You don't like that you're born 5'3", so you'll do a genetic modification or get bone implants that make you 6'10". All those sorts of things. You're going to seek happiness by trying to alter yourself. And in my opinion, if you want to do that to yourself, that's fine. I'm not going to stop someone's freedom from altering their self. But as the freedom to swing your fist ends where the other man's nose begins. Don't force that stuff on any other people. You can do it to yourself. That's fine. But don't expect me to allow you to infringe on other people's rights to stay a natural human being. Or if everybody's eating brain enhancement drugs or putting microchips in their brains and they're able to do math equations in 0.4 seconds, whereas people who don't get these genetic or pharmacological or mechanical upgrades or enhancements to themselves, they can't compete in the school system with the people who do, and it will create a schism. And the transhumanists will be like, oh, these natural people are disgusting, they're savages, they're like retarded monkeys. And I don't mean retarded in the derogatory sense, I just mean they will see natural humans as having slowed development, slowed down development. And the great schism will form, and transhumanists will obviously consider themselves to be superior to people who prefer a natural lifestyle and a spiritual lifestyle. And you already see that happening where people think spirituality is delusion, that it leads nowhere. Obviously, people who say this have no spiritual experience. If they did, they wouldn't be talking out their ass like that. But these are widely held beliefs in the Western world that spirituality is a form of mental illness. And that idea becomes more and more and more popular, especially as liberal ideology takes hold more and more and more. All of this is opposed by Eurasianists. That's my point in saying all this. And Eurasianists base their thinking in spiritual traditionalism, kind of along the lines of Julius Evola and René Guénon and Alain Benoit. Is that how you pronounce his name? Is Benoit? I think he's French. Eurasian thinking is more based on spirituality and is against the slippery slope of liberalism that leads to transhumanism. And they want to contain it because globalism, liberalism has become globalism, whereas liberals want the whole world to be liberal. They don't want any other type of civilization to exist. They just want everyone to believe in their ideology, and if you don't, we'll bomb it into you. We'll bomb the democracy into you if you disagree with us. We'll put military bases in your country, and we'll make sure you vote in your next election. And if you don't, we'll kill you. Along with that comes corporatism, the commodification of everything, disrespect for the land, start mining for all the materials and selling stuff. And so this commodification comes along with globalization, and transhumanism comes along with it because the technology companies are the most lucrative companies in liberal civilization. And so, of course, they want to sell you transhuman biomodifications, pharmaceuticals, mechanical augmentations, genetic augmentations, whatever. The tech companies are going to make infinite money off of this kind of stuff. So of course they're going to push it along with globalism. So following globalism is transhumanism. They're part and parcel. One leads to the other. You can't have globalism without also pushing transhumanism and like computer science and this sort of this false spirituality that, oh, you know, if you don't like this world, just upload your mind into the virtual world. Oh yeah, the metaverse or whatever, and oh, you can be Superman flying around shooting lasers from your eyes in this virtual world. You could do whatever you want in this virtual world. It's great. And they just want you to live in this illusional simulacrum of reality and be happy with it. Be happy with this crazy simulacrum. Instead of living in the real world, they want you living in a computer world, and then that way they can just control you, enslave you, treat you like cattle. And Eurasianists oppose this. You know, Alexander Dugin talks about this all the time in his books, and he's right. Obviously, in my opinion, I agree with him. I came to these conclusions before I even heard about Alexander Dugin. I started reading Dugin maybe 6 years ago. And I've been thinking about transhumanism for roughly 20 years. So when I started studying Eurasianism, I was like, oh, wow, I already believe in a lot of this stuff, and a lot of my American friends believe in this stuff too. It's like we have a lot in common with the way Russians think. And the American media will have us think that, oh, we're totally different. If you live in the West, you are a liberal, and you have to be. And of course, they'll pressure you into being a liberal, you know, with the social media censorship and you know, liberalism is its own form of totalitarianism, that like you have to believe in liberalism, otherwise you don't fit in, you become a pariah, an exile, people ridicule you, call you all sorts of names if you say illiberal things, if you believe in illiberal things, you just get socially chastised, you get kicked out of the edifice of your society. You become like anti-structural, you become liminal, you become fringe, you become pushed to the outskirts. And you can't like climb the social, political, or economic ladder unless you believe in liberalism. You know, try saying something illiberal at your corporate job. You'll get fired. You'll get sent to human resources just for holding illiberal beliefs. Talk about spirituality at the next party you go to in New York City or San Francisco. People look at you like you're crazy. They'll be like, everyone here is smarter than that. We all know spirituality isn't real. Why are you talking about? What are you, some sort of crazy person? We're smart here. You're dumb. Why are you saying this? And then there goes your social selection. Your social access is out the window. So it's a form of liberalism is a form of totalitarianism. It's an atheistic, materialistic, ostensibly transhumanistic form of totalitarianism. And they want the whole world to be like that because it can't exist really unless the whole world is like that. Because if you have real spiritual traditions and people are super happy, super peaceful, super chill, healthy, their political systems work really well because they're based on spirituality, then obviously the liberals and transhumanists will see how miserable they are, how many pharmaceutical drugs they're taking, how many physical modifications they're doing to their bodies just to seek happiness, and they are not happy still. They're still pretty miserable with themselves because they have that, you know, what who said it? Was it Pascal who said they have a God-sized hole in their heart, or a God-shaped hole in their heart, and they're trying to fill it with all this stuff. You know, just the contrast of those two civilizations, the spiritual civilization will be obviously superior to those who can reason correctly. Obviously, they're happier and more peaceful, and their land is more prosperous, and the transhumanists and liberals are, you know, there's mass shootings all the time. There's miserable people. The suicide rate is out the frickin' roof. The drug addiction, it's madness in our society, in Western civilization. People are miserable today. They're absolutely existentially miserable. And you compare that misery to someone who's just a chill spiritual traditionalist. I mean, it's night and day. So you can't have transhumanism and liberalism in the long term unless everybody is a transhumanist liberal, because you just can't have the contrast between a spiritual society and a liberal society. It's not, you know, the liberal society would fall apart just when it became aware of how much superior a spiritual civilization is. So that's why it's so important for the West to make the whole world the West. It's like their imperative goal. And Eurasia is the challenger to that goal. So that's pretty much all I wanted to say, is that, you know, the conflicts going on between the two types of civilizations, seafaring and land-based, or Western versus Eurasian, or Atlanticist versus, Eurasian, needs to be understood that the Eurasianists want a multipolar world where all cultures and civilizations get to thrive on their own terms, and the Westerners and liberals, the globalists, the corporatists, the technocrats, they want their world order to be spread. They want to conquer the earth with their single ideology, and they don't want to be challenged. They hate it when people challenge them, which is why they're fighting a proxy war now against Eurasia. You know, as the English said in World War I, we will fight the Austrians to the last drop of French blood. Today you could just modify that quote for the Americans, where you have the American federal government saying, we'll fight the Russians to the last drop of Ukrainian blood. And America is just fighting a proxy war against those whom they wish to destroy. The challenger, the great Eurasian challenger that Zbigniew Brzezinski warned them about. And they don't want to be challenged. And I think everybody just needs to calm the fuck down, because the way Americans are speaking today is as though they want a nuclear war. I mean, I listen to liberals in the United States talking about how much they hate Russia, how much they hate everything, everyone that's not liberal, and how they deserve to be destroyed and stuff like that. It's like, who talks like that? Madmen, psychopaths talk like that. We have nuclear weapons on both sides of this conflict. Why in the world would you be saying things like that? It is madness. It is irresponsible. It's psychopathic. And we need to do everything to inculcate a culture of understanding and harmony. And the multipolar world order is our best option at doing that. It's the best option to avoid a freaking nuclear Armageddon. Do you understand that? And to just keep fanning the flames, to listen to the Western propaganda as though the news media is telling you the truth. They're not. You need to just snap out of it. We all need to just take a freaking breath and just realize that historically, what is going on here? Eurasia is simply trying to consolidate its own territory, its own civilization. It is protecting itself from Western poison, from globalism. It needs to regroup its lost territories and move into the future with its own historical mission. They are ontologically threatened by liberalism. They are existentially, ontologically threatened by the spread of globalism and liberalism. It will destroy their culture. It will destroy their spirituality. It will destroy their national identities. It will destroy their, essentially their soul, their customs, their traditions. And they feel threatened, and that is the heart of this. That is the heart of everything going on in the world. And like any civilization, they deserve their own space. They deserve their own traditions, their own civilization. They have their own unique civilizational mission to achieve in the future, and we need to respect that. I haven't seen such venom and anger and hatred coming from my fellow Americans since the early 2000s against the Arab world. And you know how delusional Americans were with their hatred of Arabs? It was crazy. And look at what happened. Look at the Arab world now. America has all but destroyed it, has obliterated it, obliterated their cultures, their governments, put central banks everywhere. It's chaos. And they want to now do that to Eastern Europe and Russia. That's their next target, their next operation, is to do that there. But the thing is both America and Russia have nuclear frickin' weapons. This is a dangerous and stupid thing to be doing. And Eurasia deserves respect. It deserves to be tolerated. They don't want liberalism. They don't want globalism. They don't want transhumanism. They do not share our values. That's fine. They don't have to. Not everybody is a liberal. Not everybody is a capitalist. Not everybody is a globalist. And guess what? They don't have to be. Liberalism is not the best ideology in the world. You might think it is, and it might work for you, but it does not work for everyone. And we all need to respect that. We all need to allow a multipolar world order to exist. And especially considering the recent assassination attempt on Alexander Dugin that actually resulted in the death of his daughter. It was a car bomb. She was going to borrow his car, and it blew up, which means someone was trying to kill Alexander Dugin, the guy who is the main voice of Eurasianism. This was like a week ago. And his daughter was a great woman. She was one of the greatest voices for world peace and harmony and understanding, and she's not with us anymore because somebody tried to kill her father. This is madness. This is absolute madness. So that's it for this video. I'm going to get into a bunch of book recommendations now. So if you're not interested in book recommendations, you can end the video here. I apologize for the heatedness of this video, but I've just been deeply disturbed over the last year or so, the last 6-7 months, by what I've been hearing and seeing in my society around me. And there are not enough voices like mine that are trying to inculcate peace and understanding and multipolarity. And it's a disturbing trend. And so I just felt called to make a video like this to just do my part at creating peace in this world, at diffusing any hot-headed tempers and hatred toward one another, and basically to put liberals in their place. Your ideology is not that great. It's failing. It's a type of totalitarianism. It's a hangover from the 20th century, and it should be contained to the Western Hemisphere, or Western Europe and the Western Hemisphere, and it doesn't belong anywhere else. Liberalism doesn't belong in the rest of the world. You want it for America? Fine. I can tolerate it. I live here. There's some great things about liberalism that I appreciate. It's fine, but it only belongs here. It doesn't belong anywhere else unless those other people want it. And what they want from us, they can take. We don't have to force it upon them. So let's just all breathe and leave each other the hell alone. So anyway, with that being said, I thank you very much for watching this. I hope it was some good food for thought. I'm very sorry if it bothered you. I'm really not trying to piss anyone off. I don't want to upset you or anything like that. Like I said, it's just something I had to say. So I've got a ton of book recommendations here. If you want to know where my thinking comes from, well, some of it, not all of it. Some of it is just from personal experience, but a lot of it is from reading. We can start with some interesting classics. Now these are the books that are like from the liberal point of view. So if you've ever heard of Francis Fukuyama, he has this popular book written in, I think it was 1993. It's called The End of History and the Last Man. Now, Francis Fukuyama is one of the most delusional men who's ever existed. He is crazy. He's one of those messianic liberals who, his whole book, The End of History, is about how he believes if everybody believed in liberalism and democracy, that there'd be no more war, no more conflict, everything would be prosperous, everybody would be wealthy, and history would end because there'd be no more problems, and we'd live in a great utopia as long as everybody believes in democracy and liberalism. And he was like one of the main political theorists of the 90s, well, the 80s and 90s, and basically the American federal government and corporations took his word as the gospel truth. And his thinking is obviously based on the sort of Kissinger, Brzezinski, Rumsfeld thinking of the New World Order, the liberal world order. It's the best way, it's the only way, it's the best ideology, this is the future. That sort of, just that crazy Westernism that leads to globalism. He was like the last great liberal theorist, and by the early 2000s, he was like recanting this book. He was like, actually, this was kind of delusional. He like admitted that it was stupid. But people still read it. People still believe it. It's like a coffee table book that a lot of liberals have. Another book along this line is called The Anglo-American Establishment by Carroll Quigley, who was a college professor. He was actually Bill Clinton's mentor when he was a college student. The Anglo-American establishment itself got pretty pissed off at Carroll Quigley for writing this book because it kind of expose their secrets. You know, it talks a lot about like the Milner Group and the Rhodes Scholarship Circles and like basically what people call like the Illuminati or like the Western Cabal, you know, the New World Order groups of people and like what their methodology is. And Carroll Quigley was one of them. And he wrote the book because he loved that stuff, like the Anglo-American world order, the liberal world order, spreading it across the world, spreading democracy and capitalism. He thought it was great. And he wanted to brag about it. He wanted everyone to see how great it was, how smart the Milner Group is, and stuff like that. So he wrote a book thinking people would celebrate it. But people are like, oh my God, this is like Illuminati stuff. And so people got angry at him for revealing their secrets. So it's a pretty good book. This one's kind of funny. It's called Secret Intelligence, Inside the American Espionage Empire, by Ernest Volkman and Blaine Baggett. This kind of doesn't have too much to do with the Cold War, although it reveals the tactics of American intelligence agencies and how they destabilize political regimes, how they use the news media to lie, and all the other crazy stuff that they get up to. And what they show you in this book, which covers roughly the 1940s to the 1980s, you can see those same tactics and strategies being used today against the American people and against Eurasia. So it won't have anything about Eurasia necessarily, or Russia or the Cold War or anything like that, but it does show you the patterns and tactics that are used that a person with open eyes will be able to see today. Now we can get into some of more into the political Eurasianist side of things. Of course, you have Alexander Solzhenitsyn. He's a famous writer. He has a very good book called Warning to the West. This is a series of talks he gave to American unions when he moved to America after he was let out of the prison camps in Siberia. He moved to the United States and he just saw the liberals and the unions and radicals in America that were like doing the same stupid things that the Bolsheviks were doing, believing the same delusional things, and was just saying like, look, you're on that slope toward communism and self-destruction, and this is just like a great little book about a guy who lived through the Soviet Union warning the United States like, you're making all the same mistakes we just made over the last century. Then of course you have the Putin interviews by Oliver Stone. This is also a Showtime documentary series, but the book has more in it than the show did, and the book is better. This just kind of shows you Vladimir Putin's view on politics, and it gives you an inside look into his mind and how he's actually not that crazy. How the West wants you to think he's some sort of crazy, evil madman. He's a little crazy, and he's not the best leader for Russia, but he's got some understandable ideas that are easy to sympathize with. And this book will put a more human face on Putin instead of this nonsense you hear about how he's like evil fascist or whatever, which is just absolute nonsense. Then, of course, we move into probably the most important books regarding this video are the books by Alexander Dugin and his Fourth Political Theory. I didn't cover this in the video, I should have, but the fourth political theory is that like there's a new type of political theory that the Eurasianists are trying to come up with since the 90s. Like, you had the three, you had liberalism, fascism, and communism, which all failed in the 20th century, and then liberalism has just been a hangover from the 20th century, and now it's failing, it's becoming totalitarian. So there needs to be a fourth political theory to replace liberalism, to challenge liberalism, and put it in its place, and to generate freedom and prosperity for people to avoid totalitarianism. And, the fourth political theory will be based on, like, traditionalism, more spirituality like that, multipolarity, tolerance of other civilizations, different types of economic systems, that whole thing. That's all wrapped up in the fourth political theory. Then the rise of the fourth political theory. So these two books are kind of like they're kind of like one book. It's important to read them both. This is just like a sequel. It's just more about the fourth political theory. Then another Dugin book, The Eurasian Mission, An Introduction to Eurasianism. This is a very, very, very good book. It's made up of all types of essays and publications and lectures that Dugin has been giving since the early 2000s, just about what Eurasianism is and why it's important for the world. Then you have The Last War of the World Island, The Geopolitics of Contemporary Russia by Alexander Dugin. These books are quite similar, but they cover different essays and different topics, so this is also very important. This is more about land-based civilizations versus sea-based civilizations. Then you have, this is his newest one, The Great Awakening versus the Great Reset. I'm sure you've heard these terms thrown around a lot. Trump supporters like to use the term Great Awakening. It comes from recent New Age movements like the 2012 people and the people who think there's a great spiritual awakening occurring. Versus the Great Reset, which is, Klaus Schwab and the World Economic Forum's idea of basically destroying all other non-liberal, non-capitalist societies and replacing them with, a digital capitalist, transhumanist world economy, world order, a one world government. The Great Reset that they've been rolling out since 2-3 years ago. And this is a fun little book. It's short. It's quick to read. It's got a lot of good appendix with a lot of short articles and good outlined notes. It's very pithy and easy to read. Now we can get into the more spiritual side of things. Of course, Eurasianism, especially from Alexander Dugin's point of view, he gets a lot of inspiration from the traditionalists like René Guénon and Julius Evola. So there are a few of Julius Evola's books that I think are important to consider. So you have A Traditionalist Confronts Fascism. And this is how Julius Evola disagreed with Mussolini's regime. Thought it was too materialistic, too totalitarian, not based on spirituality. It was atheistic, essentially. It was corrupt, and how fascism is just a stupid system. It does not, the whole idea that fascism supports traditionalism is nonsense, because fascism is an atheistic, totalitarian, political, economic system. It has very little to nothing to do with spirituality. That the whole traditional spirituality spin of Mussolini and Hitler it was just propaganda to get people on board with them. This is a very good book, because a lot of people accuse Evola of being a fascist. He clearly was not. If you would actually take the time to read his books, you would see that he's not. And you can see, because it's a very political book, you can see some things about multipolarity in here, actually. Another book by Evola, this is his most popular one, Revolt Against the Modern World. Obviously, this is everybody's favorite book by him. It just talks about how terrible the modern world order is, how anti-spiritual it is, things like that. It's basically the same criticisms against the modern world, against liberalism, that you'll hear the Eurasianists discuss. And then the last book that I'll recommend by Evola is Ride the Tiger by Julius Evola. And this is an addendum to Revolt Against the Modern World. It's kind of well, if you are a spiritual person who believes in spiritual discipline, how can you survive this horrible modern world? And this is kind of guidelines on how to just stay sane and stay spiritual while the rest of the world is going to hell. It's a very good book. And then books that are specifically about Russian spirituality. Well, actually, this one's not so much, but this book's called The Magic Lantern. It's by Timothy Garton Ash. The Revolution of '89, witnessed in Warsaw, Budapest, Berlin, and Prague. This is a discussion of the fall of communism. And, this book is mostly from the liberal perspective. It's not really from a Eurasianist perspective, but it does describe a lot about Eastern European geopolitics and the breakup of the Soviet Union and the fragmentation of the cultural identities of the people who live there, and also now that the Soviet materialistic communistic yoke had been lifted, there was a greater call for spirituality. So that goes along with this book by Georgi Vins called The Gospel in Chains, or in Bonds. Yeah, The Gospel in Bonds. This guy was in a prison camp for 8 years in Siberia because he believed in Jesus. The communists didn't like that. And this is about it's a very personal look at this guy's life, his friends, his family, his fellow prisoners, and how their spirituality helped them endure the Soviet era, like in this totalitarian, materialistic, communistic culture. They were able to survive that madness and that tyranny and that hellish time period through their faith and through their spiritual discipline and through holding on to traditional values, and how in 1991 they won. Then you have these two books. This one is by John Fletcher, but it's mostly based on the ideas of Rudolf Steiner. It's called Russia, Past, Present, and Future. This one figured into a lot on my video about what's it called, Slavic Destiny or something like that. But this has a lot to do with spirituality and Russia's traditional views on that and how it will foster a great new civilization. And then you have Gary Lockman, one of my personal favorites. He was the bass player from Blondie, so he's like a New Jersey hometown hero. But he's become a great spiritual philosopher in his own right. He has a book called The Return of Holy Russia: Apocalyptic History, Mystical Awakening, and the Struggle for the Soul of the World. And he'll get into Russia's spiritual thinking, how Russia has always had this really great traditional spirituality about it. He'll quote people like Soloviev and Ivan Ilyin and people like that, the so-called Silver Age philosophers. That's something you guys should look up. That's a whole other list of book recommendations. But the Silver Age philosophers of Russia, that's the late 19th, early 20th century, just before the Bolshevik Revolution and during the Revolution, you had these great spiritual mystics and traditionalists who were Eurasianist Slavophiles, and they believed in the soul of humanity and the enlightenment of the spirit and all of that, and they really planted the seeds for the future of Russia. Their movement and their ideology was wiped out by communism, but now it's coming back today, now that there is more freedom of thought allowed because the Soviets are gone. And so, Gary Lockman and The Return of Holy Russia will give you a great summary of Silver Age philosophy and a great reading list to get actually into the works of those specific Silver Age philosophers. I highly recommend Vladimir Soloviev and Ivan Ilyin. Ivan Ilyin I don't think has as many English translations, but there are a lot of people who write about him in English, so that might help. Any other books? I mean, yeah, that's it. Solzhenitsyn is a contemporary writer. Anything by him is worth reading. And of course, Alexander Dugin is really the heart and soul of the Eurasianist movement. And God bless him. And I hope he gets through this horrible episode, this horrible experience he just had. And I wish you all the best. Thank you so much for watching this video. And I hope you got something out of it. And I'll see you next time.